April 28, 1945. 11:43 p.m. somewhere on the Restchen Pass, Italian Alps, near the Austrian border. SS Sturmbannführer Karl Friedrich stood beside the lead truck of his convoy, staring into the absolute darkness of the mountain pass ahead, listening to the wind howl through peaks that had stood silent witness to empires rising and falling for millennia. Behind him, 7 military trucks sat idling, their engines creating plumes of white exhaust that dissolved into the freezing night air. Inside those trucks, packed in wooden crates marked only with sequential numbers and the double lightning bolt insignia of the SS, was cargo so valuable that Friedrichs had been told he would be shot immediately if he asked what it contained. The 23 men under his command knew only that they were to drive through the night, avoid all main roads, speak to no one, and deliver their cargo to a location in the Bavarian Alps that existed on no official map. What none of them knew, what Friedrichs himself would not understand until it was far too late, was that they were already dead men, participants in a plan so desperate and so secret that their survival had never been part of the equation. Within 6 hours, the entire convoy would vanish as completely as if it had never existed, and for the next 80 years, the question of what happened on the Restchen Pass that night would haunt historians, treasure hunters, and the few elderly witnesses who claimed to have seen lights in the mountains and heard sounds that had no earthly explanation. The journey had begun 2 days earlier in Linz, Austria, at a warehouse complex that had been under SS guard since 1943. Friedrichs had been summoned from his posting in Munich by encrypted telegram, ordered to report immediately with no explanation provided. He had arrived to find the warehouse surrounded by more security than he had seen anywhere except Hitler's headquarters, machine gun nests, multiple checkpoints, SS guards who looked like they had been selected for their ability to follow orders without question or mercy. Inside the warehouse, teams of men were loading the trucks under conditions of obsessive secrecy, with each crew working on a single vehicle and forbidden from communicating with the others or even looking at what the adjacent teams were doing. Friedrichs had been handed a sealed envelope containing maps marked with a route that avoided every major road and population center between Linz and the supposed destination somewhere in Bavaria. The maps had been annotated in 3 different hands, with routes crossed out and redrawn, as if the planners themselves could not decide on the safest path or had been repeatedly overruled by higher authorities. Attached to the maps was a single sheet of paper with instructions typed on an SS letterhead but signed by no one, orders so explicit and so threatening that Friedrichs had memorized them and then burned the document as instructed. The convoy was to travel only at night. It was to avoid all military and civilian checkpoints, even German ones, even SS ones. If stopped by anyone for any reason, Friedrichs was authorized to use lethal force without warning. If any vehicle broke down beyond immediate repair, the cargo was to be transferred to the remaining trucks and the disabled vehicle destroyed completely, burned until nothing identifiable remained. If the convoy was in danger of being captured, Friedrichs was to kill every man under his command and then himself, but only after ensuring that the cargo could never be recovered. The orders had concluded with a single line that had made Friedrichs's blood run cold: "The fatherland's future depends on this mission. Failure is not an option because failure means there is no future." The men he commanded were a strange mixture that reflected the chaos of the dying Reich. Half were veteran SS soldiers, hard men who had served on the Eastern Front and had the dead eyes of those who had seen and done things that could never be spoken about. The other half were younger, some barely 18, boys who had been drafted into the Waffen-SS in the final desperate months when Germany was conscripting anyone who could hold a rifle. Friedrichs himself was 31, a career SS officer who had joined the organization in 1936 when it still seemed like an elite formation rather than what it had become by 1945, the enforcers of a regime that was collapsing into complete madness. He had served in Poland and France and briefly in Russia before being transferred to administrative duties in 1943 after taking shrapnel in his leg that left him with a permanent limp. He had spent the last 2 years of the war shuffling papers and processing reports and trying very hard not to think about what those reports contained, about the columns of numbers that represented human beings systematically murdered, about his own complicity in machinery of death that had consumed millions. He had told himself he was a soldier following orders, that his personal feelings were irrelevant, that Germany's survival required sacrifices that future generations would understand even if the present could not bear to acknowledge them. But now, standing in the freezing darkness of the Alps with orders to deliver cargo whose contents he could not know to a destination that might not exist, Friedrichs felt the weight of every compromise he had made, every order he had followed without question, every moment when he had chosen career over conscience. The Reich was dying, everyone knew it, even if speaking that knowledge aloud meant execution for defeatism. The Americans and British were pushing from the west, the Soviets from the east, and Germany was being ground between them like grain between millstones. Berlin was under siege. Hitler was in his bunker issuing orders to armies that no longer existed. And here was Friedrichs, leading a convoy of mysterious cargo through mountain passes on a mission that made no strategic or tactical sense unless you understood that the people giving orders had long since stopped thinking about winning the war and were focused entirely on something else, escape, perhaps, or revenge, or preserving something for a Fourth Reich that existed only in the fevered imaginations of fanatics who could not accept that their thousand-year empire was ending after just 12 years. The convoy had left Linz at dusk 2 days ago, driving south through Austria on secondary roads, avoiding towns, stopping only when absolutely necessary. They had crossed into Italy near Innsbruck, taking mountain roads that were barely more than tracks, climbing higher into the Alps with each passing hour. The trucks were not designed for this kind of terrain, and twice they had nearly lost vehicles to mechanical failure or roads that were washed out by spring runoff from melting snow. Each time, Friedrichs had managed to keep the convoy moving, transferring cargo when necessary, bullying the vehicles forward through sheer determination and the fear of what would happen if he failed. The men were exhausted, cold, frightened in ways they would not admit. They had been driving for nearly 40 hours with minimal rest, navigating treacherous roads in darkness because using headlights would advertise their presence to anyone watching from the peaks above. Food was running low. The April weather in the high Alps was viciously unpredictable, with snow flurries alternating with freezing rain that turned the roads into sheets of ice. Several of the younger soldiers had asked Friedrichs what they were carrying, why this mission was so important, where exactly they were going. He had told them nothing because he knew nothing, and he had seen the way his answers increased rather than decreased their fear. One of the veterans, a sergeant named Kruger who had been with the Leibstandard Adolf Hitler division in Russia, had pulled Friedrichs aside during one of their brief stops and spoken with the bluntness of a man who knew he was probably going to die soon and had stopped caring about protocol. "Sir, this mission makes no sense. The war is over even if we're not allowed to say it. Whatever we're carrying, wherever we're supposed to take it, there's no point anymore. We should find a place to hide, ditch the trucks, get out of our uniforms, and try to survive what's coming. There's going to be a reckoning for what we've done, for what the SS has done, and our best chance is to disappear before that reckoning arrives." Friedrichs had not disagreed because he could not disagree, but he had also not been able to accept Kruger's logic. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders, and without orders, without structure, without the framework of duty and command, what was he? If he abandoned this mission, if he simply walked away, then every compromise he had made, every moral boundary he had crossed, every moment when he had chosen obedience over conscience, all of it would be revealed as meaningless, the actions of a man who had sold his soul for nothing more than the illusion of purpose. So he had told Kruger they would complete the mission as ordered, and Kruger had looked at him with something between pity and contempt and walked away without saluting. Now they were on the Reschen Pass, barely 20 miles from the supposed destination, and Friedrichs was beginning to understand that something was wrong, that the mission he had been given was not what it appeared to be. The maps he had been provided showed a route that ended at coordinates in the Bavarian Alps, but when he had plotted those coordinates more carefully during one of their rest stops, he had realized they corresponded to nothing, not a town, not a military installation, not even a building shown on any map he could find. Just an empty location high in the mountains, as if whoever had planned this mission expected him to deliver the cargo to the middle of nowhere and then, what? Wait for further orders. Expect someone to meet him there. The whole thing had the feeling of a trap or a trick, as if the real purpose of the mission was not to deliver cargo but to get rid of everyone involved in a way that would leave no witnesses. The wind increased, howling through the peaks with a sound like voices crying out in some ancient language. The temperature was dropping, and frost was forming on the trucks, making them glisten in the faint starlight that penetrated the cloud cover. Friedrichs made a decision. They would drive for another hour, try to reach the coordinates while it was still dark, and then he would assess the situation. If there was nothing at the destination, if they arrived and found only empty mountains, he would open the cargo crates and see for himself what was so valuable that 24 men had been sent to their probable deaths to protect it. He gave the order to move out, and the convoy began its slow advance through the pass. The road here was barely wide enough for the trucks, with a rock wall on the left side and a drop into darkness on the right that could be hundreds or even thousands of feet. There was no way to tell in the night. The lead truck's engine coughed and sputtered, struggling with the altitude and the cold, and Friedrichs felt his stomach clench with the fear that they would break down here, in the middle of this godforsaken mountain pass, with no possibility of rescue or escape. They had been driving for perhaps 20 minutes when the sound reached them, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the mountains themselves, a vibration that could be felt as much as heard. Friedrichs ordered the convoy to stop, and in the sudden silence after the engines shut off, the sound became more distinct. It was like thunder, but continuous, and it was growing louder. Kruger appeared beside him, his face barely visible in the darkness. "Avalanche," Kruger said, his voice flat with certainty. "Somewhere above us. Could be miles away or could be right on top of us. No way to tell in the dark." Friedrich stared up at the invisible peaks above them, trying to locate the source of the sound, but there was nothing to see except darkness and the occasional glimmer of starlight on snow. The rumbling continued, and now he could hear other sounds mixed in with it, crashes and roars that suggested massive amounts of rock and snow in motion. The convoy was trapped in the pass, with no room to turn around and nowhere to take cover. If the avalanche was heading toward them, they would have perhaps seconds to react, and there would be nothing they could do. "Everyone out of the trucks!" Friedrich shouted, and the men poured out, some of them running away from the vehicles as if distance would somehow save them if thousands of tons of snow and rock came down on their position. The sound was everywhere now, seeming to come from all directions at once, and Friedrichs felt a terror unlike anything he had experienced even in combat, the primal fear of natural forces beyond any human capacity to resist or control. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that Friedrichs could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the breathing of the men around him, could hear the faint whistle of wine through the peaks. They waited, frozen, expecting death, but nothing happened. The mountains had spoken and then fallen silent, and they were still alive. Kruger was the first to laugh, a sound that had more hysteria than humor in it. "Maybe the mountains don't want us here," he said. "Maybe they're trying to tell us something." Friedrichs ordered everyone back into the trucks. They had lost 15 minutes, and dawn was perhaps 3 hours away. He wanted to reach the coordinates while it was still dark, wanted to understand what this mission was really about before the sun rose and revealed their position to anyone who might be watching from the peaks above. The convoy moved forward again, grinding slowly up the pass, and then the road began to descend. They were crossing into Bavaria now, leaving Italy behind, entering the final stretch before the coordinates that marked their supposed destination. The clouds above them were beginning to break up, and moonlight filtered through, casting the landscape into dramatic contrasts of silver light and absolute shadow. That was when Friedrich saw the lights ahead, not vehicle lights, but something else, something that flickered and moved in ways that made no sense. He ordered the convoy to stop again and took 2 men with him to investigate on foot, moving cautiously forward with weapons ready, every sense alert for ambush or trap. What they found was impossible, and yet it was there, undeniable in the moonlight. The road ahead simply ended, not because it had been destroyed by avalanche or combat but because it had never continued beyond this point. The maps had lied or had been deliberately falsified. There was no destination, no coordinates that corresponded to any real location. There was only the end of the road and, beyond it, a steep slope covered in snow that led down into a valley that appeared on no map Friedrichs had ever seen. And down in that valley, clearly visible in the moonlight, were lights. Not electric lights, not campfires, but something else, a strange blue-white glow that pulsed and moved like living things. Friedrich stared at them and felt reality itself beginning to fracture around the edges, felt the foundations of everything he thought he knew becoming unstable. "What are those?" one of the men whispered, and Friedrichs had no answer because there was no rational answer, no explanation that fit within the framework of the world as he understood it. Behind them, back at the convoy, someone screamed. Friedrichs ran, his bad leg forgotten. Weapon in hand, expecting attack, expecting the ambush he had feared from the beginning. What he found was worse than any ambush. The back of one of the trucks had come open, and several crates had fallen out and broken open on the rocks. The moonlight revealed what was inside, and Friedrichs felt the last remnants of his sanity begin to crumble. The crates did not contain gold or documents or weapons or any of the things he had been imagining. They contained bodies, children's bodies, perfectly preserved, their faces so peaceful they might have been sleeping except for the absolute stillness, the waxy quality of their skin, the way the moonlight reflected off their open eyes. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds packed in the remaining crates, and Friedrichs understood with sudden, horrifying clarity that he had been transporting the evidence of crimes so monstrous that the people who had ordered this mission had decided the only solution was to make that evidence disappear completely, to hide it so far up in the mountains that it would never be found. The men were gathering around the broken crates, and Friedrichs could see the realization spreading through them, could see the moment when each man understood what he had been carrying, what he had been part of, what organization he had sworn allegiance to. Some of them turned away and vomited. Some of them stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Kruger picked up one of the small bodies with a tenderness that seemed impossible from such a hard man, and tears were streaming down his face as he placed the child carefully back in the crate as if that small act of dignity could somehow matter, could somehow atone for anything. "We have to report this," one of the younger soldiers said, his voice breaking. "We have to tell someone, we have to." "Tell who?" Kruger interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. "Tell the SS. Tell the people who ordered us to transport this. There's no one to tell, boy. There's no authority left that isn't covered in blood. The entire system is rotten, and we're part of it, every one of us." Friedrichs felt his training, his discipline, his entire sense of identity as a soldier and an officer crumbling away like sand. The lights in the valley below pulsed brighter, and he realized with a certainty he could not explain that those lights were somehow connected to this, that the valley was where they had been intended to dump the evidence, that the impossible lights were part of some last desperate plan to hide crimes that could never be hidden, only postponed in their discovery. "We're not delivering this cargo," Friedrich said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, the voice of someone he no longer recognized. "We're going to bury it here, properly, with whatever respect we can still offer. And then we're going to surrender to the first Allied troops we can find, and we're going to tell them everything, where we came from, what we were ordered to do, what the SS has done. We're going to be witnesses instead of accomplices." Kruger nodded slowly. "They'll probably hang us anyway," he said. "But at least we'll hang for choosing to be human at the end, even if we forgot how to be human for too long before that." They worked through the night, all 24 men, digging graves in the frozen ground with whatever tools they had, wrapping the small bodies in blankets and tarps, saying what prayers they could remember from childhoods that seemed impossibly distant now. The lights in the valley below watched them work, pulsing and moving, and Friedrichs had the strange sense that the mountains themselves were bearing witness, that this place would remember what they did here even if the human world forgot. As dawn began to break, painting the peaks with pink and gold, they completed their task. The cargo was buried, the trucks were pushed off the cliff into the valley below where they exploded one by one, and the men stood together on the road that led nowhere, waiting for whatever came next. The Allied forces found them 3 days later, a bedraggled group of SS soldiers who had walked down from the mountains with their weapons dismantled and their hands raised. They told their story, all of it, and some of it was believed and some of it was dismissed as the desperate fabrications of war criminals trying to avoid responsibility. Friedrichs and 6 of his men were tried at Nuremberg in one of the later, lesser-known tribunals. 3 were hanged, including Kruger. Friedrichs and the others received long prison sentences. The location where they had buried the children was investigated, but the coordinates Friedrichs provided led to nothing. The terrain had changed, or he had misremembered, or something about the mountains themselves had shifted. Searchers found the remains of the burned trucks in the valley below, but nothing else, no graves, no evidence of what Friedrichs claimed had happened. The strange lights were never explained, and the few local inhabitants of the region who were questioned said they had seen unusual phenomena in that valley for generations, that the place was old and strange and that the mountains kept their secrets. Friedrichs served 19 years in prison and was released in 1964, a broken man who spent his remaining years trying to convince anyone who would listen that what he had witnessed was real, that there were crimes hidden in the Alps that had never been accounted for, that the full horror of what had been done would never be completely known because some evidence had been successfully erased. He died in 1983, and his testimony remains in archives, read by occasional researchers who wonder if there was any truth to his story or if it was simply the fantasy of a guilty man trying to find some meaning in his complicity. The valley in the Alps that exists on no official map is still there, and local guides still report seeing strange lights on certain nights, still warn hikers to avoid that particular region because people who go there sometimes become disoriented and lost. The mountains remember what happened, even if the human world has forgotten or chosen not to believe. And somewhere high in the peaks, in ground that freezes solid every winter and barely thaws even in summer, there may be graves that contain evidence of crimes that were never fully brought to light, witnesses to evil that remain buried, waiting for a truth that may never be uncovered. No medals were given for what happened on the Rezchen Pass that night. No official record acknowledges the convoy that vanished carrying its cargo of horror into the mountains. Only the Alps remember, ancient and patient and silent, keeping their secrets as they have kept secrets for millennia, waiting for a day of judgment that may never come, or may come when the mountains themselves finally speak and reveal all that has been hidden in their eternal shadows.